Jotaka, tell us what happened last weekend. You all pulled this off literally about a week ago, didn't you?
It was, I think, the very early part of August 1st. I was sitting at home and I just got a spirit in me of enough. It was like absolutely enough. We had seen these narratives. We've seen this conversation about Senator Harris being too ambitious. We saw the pitting of Black women against each other. This notion where the Politico runs this headline or this narrative that Congresswoman Karen Bass is the anti-Kamala Harris. And we saw all of these personal attacks on these Black women, all highly qualified Black women who were named in the VP process that no other person in the process, the other white women, had not been subjected to, and no man in any previous process had ever been subjected to. And so I just sat there and I sent out an email to about 60 or 70 of my friends. And I have a lot of friends. I like to do this hashtag, my friends are dope. And it wasn't just me because I sent out an email, but everyone was feeling the same thing. And we knew what we had to do. And that's what Black women always do, is come together and save America, save this party. And we came together under a banner of Win with Black Women. And what we wanted to do is send a very strong message to everyone, the media, to even donors, select members of the vetting committee, that what we would not do would be to allow the racism and the sexism that was taking place in this VP process. Also, very many members of those more than 700 women that signed on to this open letter also wanted to make a very clear point that it was important for there to be a Black woman on this ticket. And so that group of amazing, strong Black women, intergenerational from all across the country, came together and was very loud and clear what we knew both in our hearts, what we knew that the polling showed us, that, you know, in swing states, Higher Heights released the poll. 48% of voters in swing states felt that it was important for Vice President Biden to put a Black woman on the ticket. 60% in those swing states of millennials and Gen Z felt that it was important. So we knew in polling, we also knew in our hearts and mind, and also Black women were very clear. We were tired of being called the backbone of the party, and indeed being the backbone of the party. And it was time for the party to recognize us as the leaders that we always have been, that we are today, and that we will be tomorrow.
You know, Mark, can I just add to that, if it's okay? Because part of where this also started, I know Latasha's going to join us shortly, and those of us who did that initial letter, you may remember that very early on, Stacey Abrams, the Biden campaign, kind of had her name out there as somebody early on that they might consider for vice president. And then when we found out that her name really was on the list, and I just, as a sidebar, I worked for her campaign in 2018, so I don't want to, so I do love her, but I don't want to, you know, I'm not playing favorites here, but, you know, she was so bold and honest about answering when reporters said, you're on the tick, you know, your name has been mentioned, you're on the job, instead of the kind of usual Washington, you know, the way the men have done it. She said yes, and here's why I'm qualified. Here's my bona fides. And I think that's important to point out, because as Black women, so often, you know, we are overqualified, we have extra credentials, and we get completely overlooked. And what we started to see were some attacks on her for being so bold and so honest. And that was initially part of why a group came together under this banner of Black and female. That, you know, yes, some people were, you know, at that point we had a list of about 5 sisters, I think, or 6, who we knew were on the extended list. But we thought it was so important to unify Black women and to show a unified voice that Black women needed to be taken seriously as potential vice presidential nominees. And that was part of how we shifted that conversation from if to why not. And, you know, increasingly, what was a beautiful thing to see is so many other people joining that conversation publicly, whether it was through op-eds or columns. And I think that's so important because, you know, I think for Black women, as Jotaka was saying, we just were determined. And certainly when we saw what was going on in the last couple of weeks, that we were not going to let this happen on our watch. I have, you know, liken it to, to my mind, it's one of those moments where 20 years from now, when somebody says, where were you? I wanted to be able to say, I was with my sisters and we were trying to make sure this happened, because that's how important this is. And we couldn't let this moment pass.
No, that's very important. And Karen, let me ask you this, having been an activist within the party for a number of years, I had former mayor of DC, Sharon Pratt, on with me the other evening. And she probably is a Black woman that has the longest history. She was a treasurer within the party in the late 80s, early 90s. And she described how Black women have historically been treated in the party. She used a term that was shocking to a few people. Erin Haynes was on with us, and she drew back when she said it. But Mayor Sharon said that at that time, up until what happened today, that the party often treated Black women, in her words, like a midnight love. And that was it. That is his, yeah, that's what she said. And it went viral. It's going viral right now. It's still on social media. So I want to get your reaction to that. And if you could give some historical perspective, because you have been working in the party, an employee of the party, and probably not gotten a lot of the credit that you deserve. And I can remember a time when you were the only Black woman that was doing a lot of things that were going on in the party on a staff level and on a campaign level. Yeah. So give people just a historical context of how far we've come from that.
Well, I mean, I have to remind people that actually people like Mignon Moore, who worked with Reverend Jackson and also has been, just such a major force in the Democratic Party, Reverend Bishop Leah Daughtry, who was my chief of staff at the DNC when I was there with Howard Dean. Donna Brazil, does not get the credit she deserves. She is the first and only Black woman to run a presidential campaign. And by the way, it was a campaign we won, were it not for hanging chads and all kind of other, craziness, foolishness. And so Yolanda Caraway, I mean, there's so many Black women. And I think I would liken it to feeling like the help and not feeling like the voices and faces who were out in front, but doing a lot of the work behind the scenes. And I think for a while, there are people who were happy to do that because we just wanted to win and we wanted to see things move forward, but then recognizing, we have a responsibility to ourselves and to folks coming up behind us to see that Black women are leaders in this party, are the people, and I think certainly with the elections of more Black women to Congress, I think of Auntie Maxine, but think about how many Black women we have now in Congress, and we have more Black women in terms of elected officials, and changing the idea of how we think about women in power and specifically Black women in power. And, being sometimes the only one at these tables to say, you can't say that. We can't do that. What about the Black folks? What about this vote? And, I'll tell you, Mark, the other thing, having been in progressive circles for so long that I think is really important in this moment is, as we know, historically, it has been taken for granted by the Democratic Party and progressives that Black people were progressive and were Democrats without having to feel like they had to work for our vote. And I remember in 2005, when Howard Dean became chair, him saying, it's not to say that other chairs haven't done this, but this idea of you got to show up and ask people for their vote and ask them for their support. And really changing that mentality, which I think has been happening over a period of time, that the Democratic Party, owes it to the Black community, and we're not a monolith, to actively reach out to us and ask for our vote, not just assume you have it. And so that, I think, has been a big part of the struggle and the work that has been going on within the party. And I'll just be clear, it's like when Barack Obama was elected and people were like, oh, we're post-racial. No, it's not all fixed, but this is such a huge, important moment. Mignon made this wonderful point about this is writing, to my mind, it's writing a new chapter in the history of Black women in our country, that we have a Black woman vice president. And I think it is important that people see that Black women were behind, mobilized behind her in a way that made the difference.
Karen, I know you have to run. I'm going to ask you one more question.
Okay.
What are your thoughts about the attacks that we are now seeing, which I don't think are surprising to any of us, but there are attacks coming. You know, I think when someone's being attacked from all directions, then it means they probably are doing something right. So you have the white supremacists and the right wing and Trump. And then you have an online movement that we all know helped to derail Kamala Harris's campaign during the primary with a lot of falsehood, trying to divide the Black community. What are your thoughts about all of these efforts, and are they going to be a hindrance, or do you have confidence that the majority of voters would see through all of this and do the right thing?
Well, I have confidence in our people because of the way we came together behind Kamala and behind the concept of a Black woman VP, and now behind Kamala. You know, Jotaka mentioned these letters. The first letter has over 1,000 signatories to it, and the second one, I think, over 1,500. There was a letter by 100 Black men. So I think our community realized we had to get behind her in a big way, and I think it is for us to also make sure that we're putting out correct information about her, because certainly some of those memes and themes from the primary are still out there, and we got to stop people from repeating some of them. But, you know, from Trump and the right wing, you're exactly right. I mean, it took them an hour to go ahead and attack her. Here's what I would say about this, though. This othering, this birtherism stuff that they're trying to do. They're trying to whitewash us out of history and delegitimize our existence and our role in this country and our power in this country. And I think the most important thing we can do, I think we learned this lesson, frankly, from Barack Obama. I think we have to hold the media accountable. They need to, you know, I was pleased that they said it is a lie. It is not a fact that she is not an American. We have to stop that in its tracks and be very firm and very clear to call out sexism, to call out racism, to call out the lies. Because the barrage, this is the Trump strategy, you know, having gone up against him in 2016, this is what we saw. They just try to muddy the waters with as much junk and misinformation as possible. So we've got to be the trusted voices that people can go to and say, okay, well, let me check this out. That doesn't sound right to me, so let me go find this out. I think that has to continue. We have to be aggressive about it. I think the women who have come together are committed to doing that. But I really think a big piece of this is also holding the media accountable for not trafficking in racism and sexism. And the last thing I'll say, Mark, is, you know, look, this is a learning experience for all of us. We've never had a Black woman on the ticket. So, you know, that's part of why we've got to hold people accountable. We've got to be vocal about this, because some folks are going to make mistakes. They may not realize that it's racist or sexist, even if they should. So we've got to be there to keep it straight. And that was part of what we did, you know, in the last couple of weeks, to say, we're not going to talk about personal traits, likability, she's too ambitious. Talk about what she brings to the table. Talk about what she can do for the ticket. And, you know, we've already seen over $26 million, I think it is, that they've raised. So, she's already bringing a lot to the ticket.